Hey everyone, Dan Oddy here, Engineering and Technical Sales for Detroit Speed, and today we're going to show you how to install the Detroit Speed rear coilover kit on your 1979 to 93 Ford Mustang, as well as the 79 to 86 Mercury Capri applications. The Detroit Speed rear coilover kit utilizes non-adjustable and adjustable shock options. Now the cool thing about this kit is we've designed it to be installed right in the frame rail, so it's going to maximize your wheel and tire clearance, as well as give you good exhaust clearance to run out through the back of the bumper. Product engineer Blake Tomlinson is going to show us how to install this kit on your Fox body. On a smooth level surface, block both sides of the rear tires. Loosen the rear lug nuts and jack up the front and then the rear of the vehicle. Support the car in the front and the rear by securely placing jack stands under the frame so the car is sitting level. Remove the rear wheels and tires. Place 2 jack stands securely under the rear axle tubes. If your vehicle is equipped with a factory or aftermarket sway bar, remove the 2 sway bar bolts located in the lower trailing link, or remove the sway bar end links on both sides of the vehicle. Remove the shocks from the rear axle by removing the lower shock bolts from the rear axle brackets. Using a floor jack, raise the rear axle off the jack stands. Remove the jack stands and lower the rear axle so it is in full droop. Remove the factory springs from the vehicle with the rear axle in full droop by prying them out of the lower trailing link and upper spring perch. If you have an 84 to 93 vehicle, remove the quad shock frame rail mounts by removing the 2 bolts on each side of the vehicle. Remove the interior plastic cover behind the back seat to gain access to the upper shock mount nut. Remove the nut with an impact wrench on both sides of the vehicle. Remove the shocks from the vehicle. Place the provided 7/8 flush head button plugs in the holes in the trunk floor once the factory shocks have been removed. If you have purchased the adjustable shocks, pull the trunk floor carpet up and remove the insulation to gain access to the sheet metal. Remove the factory body plugs in the trunk floor inboard of the interior panels on both sides of the vehicle. This hole will need to be opened up with an 1 3/4 hole saw. Feel inside the hole for the frame rail underneath the trunk floor. If the factory hole is too close to the frame rail, you will need to slot the hole away from the frame rail with a die grinder. Place masking tape around the pilot drill on your 1 3/4 hole saw. The tape will help retain the guide on the pilot drill for convenience. Place the provided 7/8 hole saw drill guide over the pilot drill. Use cutting fluid on the hole saw and place the hole saw drill guide in the factory body plug hole. Move the guide to one side of the hole if you need to open it up to stay away from the frame rail underneath the trunk floor. Drill both sides of the vehicle. Deburr the drilled hole with a file so there are no sharp edges. Install the provided 1 3/4 flush head body plugs in the drilled holes on both sides of the vehicle. Remove the bolts holding the lower shock mounts on the axle brackets on both sides of the vehicle. Remove the lower shock mounts. Place 2 jack stands under the rear axle tubes and remove the lower trailing link bolt at the axle on one side of the vehicle only. Allow the trailing link to drop out of the rear axle bracket. Remove the sway bar axle clamp bracket if equipped and let the sway bar hang down from the axle tube. This will give you access around the axle bracket in order to install the lower coilover bracket. The Detroit Speed sway bar has been installed on this vehicle. Place one of the provided 3/4 inch Oddy by 3 inch long crush tubes inside the lower trailing link axle bracket. Tap the crush tube in place and align it with the lower trailing link hole in the axle bracket using a drift. Install the correct lower coilover bracket so that the lower shock mount is pointing inboard of the vehicle. Place it over the back side of the axle bracket. Tap the coilover bracket in place so the top slotted hole in the coilover bracket is aligned with the lower trailing link hole on the axle bracket. Install one of the provided M12 by 120 mm hex head bolt and washer through the inboard side of the lower coilover bracket, through the axle bracket and the crush tube. Use anti-seize on the threads of the bolt and install one of the provided M12 nylock nut and washers on the bolt and tighten. Torque the hardware to 75 foot-pounds. Spot drill the axle bracket using a 1/2 inch drill bit in the top hole on the back side of the lower coilover bracket. Use the coilover bracket as a hole location template. Use a 1/8 pilot drill bit and drill through the center of the spot drill location on the axle bracket. Drill out the hole in the axle bracket from the previous step with a final drill size of a 1/2 inch. It is recommended that pilot holes be drilled first before drilling the 1/2 inch hole. Place one of the provided 1/2 inch 20 by 1.5 inch long and 1/2 inch 20 by 2 inch long hex head bolts and washers through the coilover bracket and axle bracket. The 2 inch long bolt goes through the top hole and the 1.5 inch long bolt goes through the bottom hole on the back side of the coilover bracket. Repeat this procedure for the opposite side of the vehicle. Install the lower trailing link into the lower coilover bracket using the provided N12 by 120 mm hex head bolt, nylock nut, and washers. Use anti-seize on the threads of the bolt and tighten. The Detroit Speed swivel link kit has been installed on this vehicle. Do not torque the lower link bolts yet, as that will be completed when the vehicle is at ride height. Most vehicles require the 7/8 fixture hole to be slightly deburred, as the drill fixture should fit tight in the fixture hole. Place the provided 7/8 hole saw drill guide over the pilot drill on the 1 5/8 hole saw. Install the drill guide on the 7/8 fixture hole on the bottom side of the frame rail and open up the hole for the upper coilover mount. Use a die grinder to deburr the hole for a clean finish. Verify that the upper coilover mount will fit in the 1 5/8 hole that was drilled out in the previous step. The flange of the upper coilover mount will be below the bottom side of the frame rail. Locate the upper coilover mount so that the two 5/16 holes are lined up with the center of the 1 5/8 hole and parallel with the frame. It will be critical to have the two 5/16 holes aligned with the frame rail if you plan on installing the Detroit Speed track bar kit in the future. Center punch and transfer the two hole locations on the upper coilover mount to the bottom side of the frame rail. Remove the upper coilover mount and drill 2 holes through the frame rail at the marked locations using the 5/16 drill bit. It is recommended that pilot holes be drilled first before drilling the 5/16 holes. Install one of the provided 5/16 18 by 1 inch hex head bolts into the provided single frame rail weld nut doubler plate. Wrap the threads of the 5/16 bolt with masking tape. Place the threads of the bolt into the 11/32 drilled hole on the bottom side of the frame rail closest to the front of the vehicle. Make sure the small hole is pointed towards the front of the vehicle and transfer punch the small hole on the nut plate to the bottom side of the frame rail. Install one of the provided 5/16 18 by 1 inch long hex head bolts into one of the provided single frame rail weld nut doubler plate. Wrap the threads of the 5/16 bolt with masking tape and place the threads of the bolt into the 5/16 drill hole on the bottom side of the frame rail closest to the front of the vehicle. Make sure the small hole is pointed away from the 1 5/8 hole. Transfer punch the small hole in the nut plate to the bottom side of the frame rail. Repeat this process for the 5/16 drilled hole towards the rear of the vehicle. Make sure the small hole in the weld nut doubler plate is pointed away from the 1 5/8 hole when transferring the hole to the bottom side of the frame rail. Drill the 2 holes marked on the bottom side of the frame rail from the previous step using a 5/32 drill bit. It is recommended that pilot holes be drilled first before drilling the 5/32 holes. Chamfer the holes using a large drill bit or chamfer tool until the provided 8/32 by 1/2 inch flat head screw sits flush with the frame. Install both weld nut doubler plates inside the frame rail using the 1 5/8 upper shock mount hole in the frame rail. You can also use the 5/16 18 hardware to hold the weld nut plates in place while you install the provided 8/32 flathead screws. Use medium strength blue Loctite on the threads of the screws and tighten. Remove the 5/16 hardware from the doubler plates. Refer to the instructions to assemble the coilover shocks and springs. Install 2 of the provided 5/16 18 by 1 inch long hex head bolts and 5/16 AN washers into each of the upper coilover mounts so that the threads of the bolts are pointing away from the springs. The coilover adjuster nut can now be moved up in the shock body to keep the spring pressure on the upper spring perch. Place the coilover shock and spring assemblies into the bottom side of the frame rail so the upper coilover mount fits into the 1 5/8 holes that were drilled earlier. Using blue Loctite on the threads, install the provided 5/16 hex head bolts and 5/16 AN washers into the single frame rail weld nut double plates and tighten. Raise the rear axle so that the bottom of the shocks fit into the lower coilover mount brackets. Install the provided 1/2 inch by 20 by 3 inch long hex head bolts and washers through the lower shock mounts on the side with the welded bushings. Place the provided 3/4 inch Oddy by 7/8 steel bushings over the 1/2 inch 20 bolts and through the open side of the lower coilover mounts. The bushings will rest against the monoball of the shocks. Use NICs on the threads of the bolts and install the provided 1/2 inch 20 nylock nuts. Torque the 1/2 inch hardware to 75 foot-pounds. Repeat this process for the opposite side of the vehicle. Reinstall your sway bar if equipped. Refer to the instructions to complete the installation. Now that you've got your kit installed, you've corrected the geometry, you've lowered the stance, and improved your handling performance. If you have any questions on suspension tune-up, please call us at 704-662-3272. You can also send us an email at tech@detroitspeed.com. Feel free to visit our website at detroitspeed.com or any of our social media outlets.